So this is episode 1, Bob. And episode 1 is going to be, where are the cars? So where are the cars? I know you out there that are watching this are probably asking that very question. It's like, I'm trying to find inventory. And we hear this every day, multiple times a day from a lot of our dealer partners of, where do I find good quality inventory? How do I source that? Where are the cars? So Bob, that's my first question to you as we have this discussion is, where the heck are they? Where are all those cars?
So you're throwing me a softball with a very difficult answer to it, right? But you're right. That's what dealers have been asking us. They've been asking it for months, and certain parts of the country it seems to be getting better, and certain parts it seems to be getting worse. So there's no blanket answers for that. But we're going to take a look at it. It is interesting from the manufacturer standpoint of view, and they're asking us to help the dealers with their CPO and other added. Just everyone's pulling together on this, right? It's new, uncharted territory. And with all the bad comes some good, right? It's nice to have something exciting and new and a new challenge, right? A lot of people have sharpened their businesses, including us. So it's kind of cool. But to the dealer, right? The number one answer, where's the inventory? First place you got to look is internal, right? First place you got to look is internal. You want to be able to control your controllables, quite frankly. There are some dealers, D, and you've been kind of excited by this too. There's some dealers having the best months they've ever had. Right, I just spoke to a Toyota dealer yesterday. They've had the record month. This month finished up in September. So through everything that's out there, there's some good elements to it. People sharpening their business skills and quite honestly having some success. But one of the key areas that they're all telling us, the ones that are having success, they're having a look internal harder than they ever have before. Right, doing what we call control the controllables. Whether that's in their service department. There's been dealers for years now, quite honestly. And there's been some programs looking at that end of the business at their service department and trying to cultivate their own customers out of their service departments, right? Doing what's called service mining and sending out mailers and all those kinds of things. And there are dealers having even more success than ever before. But an interesting part of that is being able to recognize those cars and actually what kind of inventory they are, right? We've known it at Carfax for a long time that consumers are looking for those cars that are well taken care of, especially at a dealership. And we refer to them as homegrown inventory, right? That's kind of becoming the language of the industry, homegrown inventory. And that has been one of the most exciting things about the current situation and where are the cars? Well, look inside first. Certainly when you look in your service department, those are your best customers. Those are your loyal customers. Those are probably multiple times doing business with you. And you have that built-in rapport. And the end result is, quite frankly, that's quality inventory. What sells well new sells well used. And those certainly sold well new, right? So that's one adage.
So maybe expand upon like the homegrown inventory, because I know that's kind of our term and maybe it's other people's term too, but we're hearing a lot of that. Like, what is it really? Like, what are we looking for? How do you identify homegrown inventory right there at the dealership?
Well, the funny thing is, it's been called several things. It's starting to be more of a unified message, though. Consumers tell us that the vehicles they're looking at the most, the vehicles that are on top of their want list, are ones that are taken care of. No one wants a vehicle that's not been taken care of, right? We've learned here at Carfax too that people actually will overlook an accident or two if the car's been well taken care of, right? If it's the right car and it's the right options and it's been taken care of, a door ding here and there doesn't really scare anybody. But the true definition of homegrown is when a dealer had it in their new car inventory and they sold it new, right? Then that customer comes back and takes care of all the service and maintenance at that dealership and then trades it back in. So then the dealer does the reconditioning on it, and now it's for sale in those used cars, right? So it was that new car that they sold new, have taken care of it its whole life, and now it's in their used car department. As a matter of fact, that is the fastest selling, most profitable inventory there is for dealers. Those cars usually don't even make it out front, quite honestly, because everyone's looking for them. And those come out of typically, they're in your service department. Now, some of those cars back there, you may not have sold new, right? So they may not be a quote unquote homegrown car, but certainly the ones that you sold new and know that car its whole life, those are top of the funnel list for consumers looking for a used car.
Hey, that just brought to mind, like we had done a couple webinars, back early on with, what's going on right now these days, back in the spring. And we were talking about lease returns. We were
Yeah.
talking about a flood of lease returns. And I know a lot of manufacturers had extended some of those lease programs throughout the summer, but here we are in October now, right?
Yeah.
So where are those lease returns? What's happening in the marketplace on those lease returns? Is that another way to source inventory?
Well, not only is it another way, it is a premier way, quite honestly. You mentioned the manufacturers. Well, the manufacturer certified pre-owned program, those lease returns are the perfect CPO inventory, right? Because CPO inventory, although a lot of dealers stock 1-year-old inventory because it's plentiful, that's not the best CPO inventory. The best CPO inventory is that 2 to 4-year-old vehicle. And guess what? Those lease returns are just that, right? So dealers are learning today. Some have been doing it longer than that, but certainly recently with all the COVID and all the challenge to find inventory, all of a sudden they are keeping those lease returns because, hey, again, that's a controllable, right? You have control of that car. You have first rights to that vehicle. And since inventory is becoming hard to find, they are keeping that inventory. And lo and behold, the best move for that inventory is to turn it into CPO. Because guess what? That's the definition of homegrown, right? Most leases have that built-in maintenance package with them. So you sold that car new, you've done all the service and maintenance. And not only that, it just fits perfect into that window. As we've done the seminar for all the manufacturers and their dealers and stuff, that ranges from 70 to 90% of what they actually sell in CPO is that 2 to 4-year-old product, right? So these are ideal for that. Some dealers have always known it, right? But those cards have been dealt a little bit different now, and more dealers are learning to take advantage of it. But you got to be able to know your market, price them right, price them aggressive. Those are the highest market value TARs in your marketplace. A frontline certified CPO deserves more money in the marketplace. And quite honestly, consumers are willing to pay it, right? We've known for years that the consumer says that they would pay up to $2,000 more for a certified car. So they certainly merit paying more to get the car and asking more for the car because it still represents a tremendous value to the consumer. So without question, those lease returns are definitely one of the controllables, right?
Yeah, you couldn't say it any better there. I want to kind of go back to what you talked about at the beginning here. You mentioned the service drive.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, as we talk to a lot of our dealer partners, is it something to really focus in on? Like, can you take a salesperson and put them in a service drive to talk to customers about that inventory? Is that a wise move? Is that something they could practically do? But then better yet, how does a dealer create service loyalty? Because you and I have talked a lot about this on the loyalty piece, and that it's so important to really not only capture customers there, but give them a great experience in the service department so that they do come back. So maybe talk a little bit to that, because I know we have some stats out there on service loyalty, what that means, and then just kind of follow it up with that practical way where they can maybe even put a person there in the service drive to help bring some customers in.
That is one of the ways. One of the best practices is to actually have a salesperson back there talking to the customers. The dealers that have done that successfully, though, make sure that the point of that is to obtain the inventory and not sell a car, right? By that, I mean, you have to put the acquisition of inventory as a first priority, because customers in for service department, if you come at them too hard to sell them a car, you'll turn them off, right? So the first approach and the most successful approach is, hey, as you know, there's a shortage of inventory. Now's the best time ever to get the most value for your car. If you're interested, we're certainly interested in buying your car. And you go with that. Now, obviously, if they sell their car, they're likely to need another car, right? And quite honestly, consumers aren't always aware of what their car is worth. They're just in the middle of all this like everybody else. So that's been the number one success for dealers that are doing that. It is a good practice. There are others, right? You can lend services and do email campaigns and do the online campaigns. And there's lots of things, not every customer likes to be talked to in person. Some like to do a little bit of exploring and stuff, but without question, you need to maximize that service department, right? Because that is, again, a controllable. You have them in there, and those are your best customers, typically with your best rapport. So putting a person on that service lane is a good idea, but again, you have to keep in mind that it is to obtain inventory as the first priority and not just come out and trying to sell them a car.
No, that makes sense. Kind of my next question is, I know part of doing Just the Facts, we don't want it to be a Carfax commercial, right? But I think vehicle history is so vitally important when we're talking about obtaining good inventory and making really good, wise decisions. So can you talk to that, just how important vehicle history is?
Yeah, well, it is ultimately what decides the difference between a car. No two used cars are the same, right? You learn that quickly in the business. Every car stands on its own merit. And the differentiator, when all of them are the same make, model, and miles and options, right? The differentiator is that history element. Who owned it? How long did they own it? How was the car used? Where did it come from? It does matter, accident versus no accident, one owner versus multiple owners. Is the car from up north, or is it from down south, or is it from out west? All those things matter, right? But the reason they matter is because that makes that car a unique car. It doesn't say what it's worth. It doesn't say that there's really no such thing as a bad car. It's just a matter of finding the right buyer for that car. And the way you do that is by using those history elements to differentiate that vehicle and make it make sense to the consumer where you're pricing it, quite honestly, right? Every consumer is looking for a good deal or a fair deal or a great deal. And the way they determine that is what is unique about that vehicle and why is it priced the way it's priced.
No, that's great. So we talked about controllables. We talked about internally inside that dealership. And as we promised on Just the Facts, we would bring an outside expert, right? So who is that? Maybe you can introduce who that person is, because I think it'd be a good idea to bring in an expert to talk about external stuff, right?
Yeah, very excited to bring in this expert. I've known this gentleman for a very long time. He is the co-founder of Auction Simplified and Dealer Simplified. In fact, he is the author of Wholesale Simplified. So, we talk about the controllables. Not everything's on our controllables. We have that wholesale side of the business and the auction side of the business, and you can't be an expert on everything. So that's why we're calling in our friend and expert on the wholesale side, Mr. Kevin Leigh. Hello, Kevin.
There he is. Hey, Kevin.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Hey, good to see you.
Doing
Good to
great.
see you
We're
from
excited.
sunny Buffalo, which is unusual.
Sunny Buffalo.
Yes, it is.
My roots come from Buffalo myself. That's where I first met Kevin. So, it's not always sunny, especially this time of year, but this is the best time of year to be in Buffalo, actually, right?
Yeah,
The fall is beautiful and the apples are sweet.
Right now, it's the fireworks of the trees. It's gorgeous.
Absolutely. Hey, Kevin, we were very excited that you agreed to come on and shed some light into the wholesale side of the business, the auction side of the business. That's just a part that's kind of unique, and there's lots of people that talk about it, but there's few that actually know what makes it work, and you're one of those people. So I guess I really just want to start out with a general question, Kevin, and that is, how is the physical auction space today? We hear a lot of stories on the outside looking in. Some are shut down, some are a disaster, and then you hear some are going crazy. So what is the truth on that, Kevin?
Well, I think like every business in America right now, there was a pretty substantial shock when COVID first started. A lot of the places were shut down, and especially where we are. And as always, though, these entrepreneurs that are running these businesses quickly evolved and found ways to keep as much of their staff as they possibly could. But the biggest transition, I think, is COVID really has accelerated the industry transition to a purely online model.
Yeah.
Most of the major auction houses pretty quickly were able to make the flip because they had their own technical teams. And a lot of the smaller auctions were scrambling, to hire companies like ours to basically get them online and get away from the lane sales. Now, of course, things have opened back up around the country in different parts. Every area is slightly different. So some have reverted right back to the lane model, which is fine. Others have just stayed onto the online model, and we have some of our clients using what's called Lane Simulator, which is a tool we provide that basically duplicates a lane without an auctioneer, what we call auctioneerless auctions. So depending on where you are and depending on where your business is in the evolution, we see I think people have been pushed into an online model. Now, that includes the buyers. I think the buyers have evolved just as much. I mean, the old flip phone buyers that, you'd see standing around in lanes, have struggled at first with COVID. And again, they evolved. They all went out and bought the basic iPhone and got the app and, started learning how to poke around and, buy cars, make mistakes. So that's really what's going on. I'm so proud of this industry. I love the auction industry and the auctioneers and the auction companies for just how quickly, they've tried to make the best of such a tough situation.
You kind of You kind of alluded to another auction, and to your point, they seem to be blending from the outside. But is there a unique difference with the online auctions now, and what kind of shape are they in today? Are they growing? Are they struggling?
Well, I think every auction company has, started struggling right away when COVID first started because the dealers weren't in business. Especially in the Northeast at first, and then of course as it migrated across the country to, to other states. So when there was no cars being shipped, and there were dealers scared, quite frankly, to get into cars. I mean, they were steam cleaning everything before they got into them, and I mean, it was crazy at first, and it still is, very, very, very difficult. But once we all settled down, a lot of us went back to the old patterns, and a lot of us evolved. So I think it's just like any time in society. Some people just get it, and some people don't. So I think based on what I'm seeing and just the investment on the, you look at Car Inc. buying out companies as fast as they can, tech companies, Manheim growing their tech side. I think you're going to see that. I mean, I know that the evolution has already begun. And if you are an auctioneer owning an auction house today, I think you should be looking at hybrid models. We were able to have auctioneers run auctions right from their countertop with a cup of coffee with no cars being moved. That's the evolution. And if you can pull that off with a COVID situation, imagine what you could do if you really put some time and money to it. And the sad side of it is some of these auctions have benefited from the less employees that they've needed when they're doing online, because you don't have to drive cars through the lane. You don't need an actual, to hire auctioneers. But on the positive side, that's what's kept them afloat during this, very difficult time.
Well, when you look at it, though, it's been a little volatile, right? You hear stories of it being too expensive to buy cars, and then all of a sudden some bottoms drop out, and then it's too expensive again. So when it comes to pricing, even on the wholesale side, it's a little touch and go now, is it not?
Yeah, it definitely is. And if you're smart, if you're, a person that knows how to work this is probably one of the greatest times. As you mentioned earlier, some of the dealers are just killing it right now. They're able to roll cars quickly. But as I've said in every conversation I've had over the last 3 months, from years of experience doing this is a time when you have to be fast. You have to be moving these cars very, very quickly, because you're going to pay a little too much right now, probably more than these cars are worth. Very similar to the real estate industry is kind of overpriced at the moment because people are able to buy. So if you are buying to store these cars, you're making a mistake, because this will change. I mean, we are only 6 months into COVID. People, we're all talking about next year. Well, we haven't even been 1 year into this. And who knows what March of 2021 is going to look like. So my advice to all of those guys and gals that are on this call is to just be super, super fast. If you buy something right now that is on the money based on the current stats, make sure you sell it quickly, because if you sit on it, you may be facing, a pretty substantial loss when the market changes again.
But still stay on offense, right? Now's not really
absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, we have to survive this, right? I mean, we all came to work every single day, and even though we weren't in the office, we're at our homes, right? We all just you fight your way through. And those who are fighting right now and thinking, I think that's probably more than anything, the important thing is to put your mind to this. And as somebody said earlier, sharpen your skills while you're in this situation. Cut some of the fat maybe that doesn't belong in your business. This is a time where you'll come out of this, if you can do the right things, you'll come out of it much stronger if you are aggressive and smart.
DJ, you look like
you're... What are you what are you seeing in the marketplace today? So when it comes to like rental cars, and Bob had talked about lease returns that come into a dealership, but I know there's a lot of technology. In my previous life, 15, 16 years ago, we had captive finance companies that put all those lease returns online for dealers to buy. So what are you seeing in that space? One, on the lease returns, and then also on those rental cars that kind of seem to like they're just sitting there somewhere.
Yeah, they're not. 50% of the cars sold wholesale in the United States are sold by dealers. About 25% are sold by the lease companies, and then repo companies, and then fleet rental companies. So it's an interesting thing to look at. Rental agencies particularly has been tough for us. Even before COVID, we had Uber and Lyft coming in, basically depleting the market for a lot of rental cars by business travelers. So immediately some of these companies were cutting back. And then, of course, we had some recessions in there, a few years back, where they started holding on to these cars longer. I mean, the last rental car I was in, which is quite a while ago, but the last rental car I was in had 70,000 miles on it. I mean, that never used to happen just 2 years ago. So things have changed. They're keeping them longer. But also, a lot of the bigger rental agencies have their own selling systems now that are not necessarily part of, the traditional auction services. Giant corporate buyers are buying them. There's, big corporate wholesale companies that have a really good niche of buying a car in one market, especially a depressed market or a closed market, and then selling it in an open market. And, we've seen that with, buying cars from Canada, and we've seen that, in a bunch of different applications across the wholesale industry. So smart people are, finding ways to move cars across the country in different ways. Now, all of that can backfire on them. As you know, the Canadian cars being purchased, that reversed twice in the last 10 years, where, the value of the dollar was one way and then the value of the dollar was the other. Same thing with, when California opened, it was great. We could drive cars into California. When California closed again, guess what? It wasn't so great. So there's, again, speed is the most important thing, even in the rental agency. And for the fleet and the repo companies, as thank God, there's a lot of freezes going on in the repo world. I mean, because of the situation where people are struggling, we're not pulling as many cars as we would have in the past. And, again, thank God for that. I think that needs to be the case, but it also has slowed down the number of those cars coming into the market, which has, quite frankly, really interfered with the buy here, pay here industry. So it's an interesting time, but sharpen your skills, go after that homegrown, and, don't pass on a trade. That's one thing I can tell you. Fight for that trade.
So, Bob had touched on, the kind of the prices, and that's kind of the second biggest pain point right now is inventory. But then the second is, how does this affect the price on wholesale? And how does this affect on that market pricing that a lot of people are really ingrained in doing? And so they use some great tools. So I guess my question would be, what is the effect of that? And how do you answer that when a dealer says to me, hey, this stuff is just priced so high, it's just so out of my range?
Yeah, well, it is priced high, and for a reason, because there's huge demand. As you know, supply and demand, are two factors in the value of any product. Right now, think about what's going on. The new car manufacturers are unable to manufacture as many cars as they used to because of supply chain issues. A huge percentage of the population have large stimulus checks that they're using to buy automobiles. A ton of people are no longer wanting to use public transportation and buying cars instead. There's a huge demand, and that demand drives the price. So I would say, don't be afraid to buy a car at a higher price, so long as you have the right tools to to actually not guess what that price is, but also put yourself in a position where, if you're buying that thing, you have a home for it very quickly. Again, I can't stress enough that turning that inventory in 10 to 15 days under a volatile time like this is going to be your critical thing.
That gut gets expensive, right? Just going with the gut. And Kevin, I know you've been a fan of our history-based value tool.
Yes.
And we appreciate that. We haven't asked for your support on it. You have gone out and talked about it in your business, how the history-based value tool comes into play, right? The days of just being able to go with year, make, model, and miles just doesn't cut it anymore. Would you speak to that a little bit, so it's not a Carfax commercial, but from your own personal experience?
Well, first of all, it's not a Carfax commercial, because you'd be one of many factors that would drive my behavior if I was out buying cars today.
Exactly.
But anybody that doesn't use every tool at their disposal when making an appraisal is just not doing their job. Don't take that wrong, but there are enough tools to make you very, very smart and accurate in the price that you put on a vehicle. So your point about some cars with an accident can still be worth more than cars that if they're well maintained, that's a good point. But it's one of the many factors that drive a pricing, my pricing of a vehicle. I happen to like Carfax tools because what it does is it puts the price on that car, not just cars in general, which is a little bit more specific, which gives it a little bit, in fact, quite a bit more weight for me. So if I was to do percentages, how I would apply each number, I think I would take a higher percentage for things that are accurate right down to the to that minute vehicle itself, rather than just a general industry or last week's auction results or even price to market.
Yep. Good point.
Yeah.
So how are we doing, Mr. D? I see we had a couple in Q&A.
Yeah, there's a couple Q&A, but before we get there, Kevin, I'd like to have you, since you kind of sponsor today's episode on Where Are the Cars, just give a little bit of a snapshot of what you do. So,
Sure.
Some people may know your name, some people may not know your name and what you do, but maybe just a snapshot of what is it you actually do.
So we're an auction software and wholesale consulting company. We provide software and know-how to dealers so that they can manage their own auctions without needing any third parties. We also help entrepreneurs create private label auction platforms, propelling their ideas into reality. So that's probably the most exciting part of our job, because we'll get a call from somebody with a brilliant auction idea, and we provide the back end and hide our name inside their genius idea. And our latest venture it's in private beta right now. It's called Used Car Ad. It's a vehicle acquisition and marketing platform for dealers of any size. It's kind of a Facebook Marketplace Craigslist replacement. It's a safe place for retail sellers to go and sell their cars to dealers without any expense. So we're super excited when this thing launches in the next couple of weeks, because that's one more acquisition tool that a dealer could have, bypassing the kind of craziness that's going on in Craigslist and Facebook, for the retail customer. And nobody wants some crazy guy showing up at their door to buy their car when they can have a certified dealer doing it. So that's what we're up to.
Awesome. What?
Are we ready to party yet?
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. There's some still hanging on here with a couple questions. So let's do that Q&A portion. But before that, Mr. Kevin, so how can someone get a hold of you if they want to contact you?
Yeah, the easy way is dealersimplified.com. That's for all of our products. Auctionsimplified.com is just for the auction business. And then wholesalesimplified.com is the book that Bob was so graciously mentioning early on. That is mostly for dealers to run their own auctions. It's not necessarily for auction houses, but it's a pretty good 2-hour read, and it'll help propel you. And if you want to call us directly, it's 877-877-4511.